asked him if he wanted first or economy. He said economy. That was $20. He presented a $20 bill. He received his ticket. The agent asked his name. He said Dan Cooper, and the agent wrote that down. He took the ticket and he departed towards the gates, and that's the last the agent saw of him. The agent had no clear impression of his appearance, except that he was probably about 6 feet tall. He had dark hair. He was a white man and wearing dark clothes, as many other witnesses testified. Okay, moving on. He eventually the flight boarded. He was the second last person to board. They boarded in those days. They did not at that time have the telescopic gate, so the passengers walked out in the rain to the back of the airplane, where, as you know, they had the descending air stair, and they walked up that air stair. So he was the second last to board, and he took seat 18E, which is the last seat, the very back row on the starboard side, the middle seat. That whole row of seats was empty at that time. That was perhaps an extraordinary piece of luck for him, because if that seat had been occupied, he would have had to sit forward and would have been much more visible to other passengers. We don't know whether that's luck or planning, but he took seat 18E, and on seat 18F on his right-hand side, he placed his briefcase, which we'll hear much more about later. Okay, then to compress the story, the airplane was taxiing out. During the taxi, it seems, probably even before they reached the runway, he turned to his left and he addressed the stewardess, as they were called in those days, who was sitting. She was the second stewardess, and she was sitting in the jump seat in I guess you would call it a galley, and he gave her a note, which she didn't read at once. Again, this story has been told many times.
Yeah.
He then asked her to read it. She read it, and it said the famous words, which have been repeated thousands of times: "Miss, I have a bomb, and I would like you to sit with me." Written very neatly in a black felt pen. She obviously was shocked. I think she took a little while to take it in. There are slightly different accounts here, but evidently at this point, the junior stewardess got involved. This is the junior of 3 stewardesses. And either the paper fell to the floor and the junior stewardess picked it up, or the second stewardess passed it to the junior. It's not very clear. It doesn't much matter for the story. But it was really at this point that the junior stewardess became the central character and the heroine of the story, because she, if you like, she picked up that ball and she ran with it. Again, to compress, it became clear that the hijacker was asking for money and for parachutes, and that demand was conveyed to the flight crew. The flight proceeded to Seattle. There was a long holding pattern where the flight crew told the passengers they had mechanical problems while they were searching for the money and the parachutes. They landed. All the passengers got off, none of them knowing that there had been a hijack. 2 of the stewardesses were allowed to get off. The money and the chutes remain on board. It's entirely possible I'm making some small errors here, but you
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah,
you can
I'll just jump in because what I'm. It's great to have a it's great to have the narrative, and what we'll probably do in the episode will be we'll tell the story, and then moments where there might be the most curious or possibly contentious moments, we will then jump in. So just up to this point so far that you've reached, where throughout this are there some points worth going back to? You know, the most interesting or curious details of the story so far, would you say?
Okay, yeah, rather than try and tell the whole narrative, let me try and think of some interesting points. Early on, the hijacker is offered a drink. I think it's the second stewardess who offers him a drink. It's her job to serve drinks. And he asks for a bourbon and 7-Up. This has been misquoted many times, and the drink has changed composition in different narratives, but in the FBI files, it's a bourbon and 7-Up. A little bit of an unusual drink. But it's not a strange drink. It's not a drink that you get alarmed about. It's a bourbon and 7-Up. He spills his drink. And at some point, I guess, the stewardess comes back and cleans up the mess. And it's possible that she provides a replacement drink. It's not really sure. But that's one aspect of the story. The bourbon and 7-Up has entered, if you like, into the legend of the case. There is also, I suppose, an interesting point about the nature of the device. In order to show that he's not kidding, he opens the briefcase and he shows one of the stewardesses, maybe both of them, what is in the case, and it consists of several cylindrical sticks wrapped in what looks like red tape. So obviously the intention is to convey that this is explosive. There is a device which looks like a battery, and there are some wires. So it looks like what you or I would imagine is a bomb. It's sufficiently convincing that they believe it's a bomb. Whether it was or not, obviously, I have no way of knowing. Nobody has any way of knowing. That device disappeared much later. But he presented something which was sufficiently convincing to be a bomb. The other, I think, interesting part of that flight, for me, actually, it's a very interesting part, is that on that same row 18, on the port side, in seat probably 18A, there was a young man, a student from University of Oregon in Eugene. He was going home for Thanksgiving. He was a big, hunky guy, 6'2", 220 pounds, good-looking guy. And he was looking over there from time to time. He had his homework spread out on the seat, and so he had things to do. But from time to time, he was looking over, and he sees the junior stewardess, who was by this time, and I forgot to mention this earlier, who was by this time sitting next to the hijacker, and she was in seat 18D. So she's right next to the hijacker, and he's on her right. And the student looks over, and he sees, well, here's this pretty stewardess sitting with this older guy. I mean, he's not merely older, and I guess if you're 20 years old, you know, anybody over 45 or 50, that's an old guy. And he's thinking, why is she interested in him? Why is she talking to him? Why is she chatting with him? And he looks a real geek. And he's got this skinny little tie. Nobody wears those ties in these days. You know, this is the 70s. We wear big, fat, flowery ties. And I'm a good-looking guy. She doesn't look at me. Okay, well, he told that story, not then. He told that story, I think, in 2013 to the Washington State Historical Society. But I believe that's a great story. I reached out to that guy, that student. He's now over 70. And he said, you know, Bob, so much time has passed. Honestly, I really, and the FBI, you know, harassed me for years and years. I no longer really remember it anymore. I don't know whether I remember it or I remember things other people said about it. So in a way, his story's lost. All that remains is what he told the FBI when they landed, plus his interview over 40 years later. But it stuck in my mind that he remembered the guy as old as Kiki, not well dressed, not good looking, and a very important point, he had this turkey neck. He had this loose skin under his neck, which is the skin of an old guy. That never really figured in the FBI's investigation. If they had focused on that, I think they could have narrowed down their suspects enormously. But they failed to pick that up. And I think it only really came into focus, as I said, in 2013, by which time the case was moribund, if not dead. That's an important part of the story of the flight from Portland to Seattle.
Sure. And so then in fact, Bob, let me just, my pen's run out and I'm making notes as we go along. So let me just go and replace this. One moment. Okay. Right. Okay, so I think in your narrative, we've reached the point where I think the plane touched down in Seattle.
Yes.
And this is where the passengers are let off.
Correct.
And this is the point where they find out that they've been hijacked. They didn't know that before.
That's right. They get off the plane and they're all met by FBI agents who tell them that they've been hijacked. And none of them knew this. Such was the, if you like, the good luck, the planning of the hijacker, and who knows which one it was. And obviously his seating on the last row played a very important part of that. So when the passengers get off, he stays where he is, they all get off. And nobody knows what happened. They all had believed the story about the mechanical problems while circling for over an hour over Seattle and Tacoma. Perhaps there's only one or two of them who have had some suspicion or have noticed the stewardess sitting with the older guy in the back row, and it caught their attention, but they didn't put the word hijack to that situation. They simply noticed there were a total of 5 passengers who later on were able to say to the FBI, yes, I was aware of that guy. I can describe him. Only 5 out of the 36 were able to say, I can give you a description of the guy. And even they had not thought that there was a hijack. Those 5 are well known. Their testimonies are all part of the narrative. You probably don't want me to recapitulate those testimonies.
Well, I mean, it may be worth going over just some of the physical attributes because we will probably, oftentimes, you know, just to break up the narrative, I'll cut back to your explanation of what happened. So,
okay, well, the physical description of the hijacker, I think, is